You can tell a good bread by the sound of the crust. A nice dark crust like this guarantees that there's going to be a lot of flavor in that bread. My interest in bread began back in the 90s. It seems like there are less artisan bakeries around. When I was visiting some friends in Europe, I tasted a real French baguette for the first time, and it was absolutely delicious. Nothing compared to the bread that I had tasted in the US. After coming home from that trip, I tried to bake some bread at home, but of course I didn't know anything about the process or the techniques, or I just didn't know what I was doing, so I didn't have any success. Can't really make a real baguette in an at-home oven because they just aren't big enough. It's been kind of a long learning process for me, but now I feel like I've got my system down so I can do it without too much effort. I like making mini baguettes where the crust to crumb ratio is more balanced towards the crust, because that's where the flavor is. The sugars are caramelized. A real bakery would have a big oven, maybe a wood-fired oven that they can get really hot. Real bakeries have steam-injected ovens. So you can approximate a real oven just with a steam tray, getting the oven hot, and using a pizza stone and bake the bread directly on that. I like making sourdough bread as well. It's a good bread to cut into slices to make toast or sandwiches with. I've experimented with some rye flour, some whole wheat flour. I usually stick to white flour baguettes and sourdough breads with just a little bit of whole wheat flour and a little bit of rye flour, just for added complexity of taste. After an initial interest in bread, to take it one step farther, I started my own sourdough starter, which I've had going maybe 5 years. It's kind of like this cool science experiment. So this is the starter. Of course, it's more than just flour and water. It's a medium for naturally occurring yeast and all kinds of bacteria. The interaction of the bacteria and yeast is what produces carbon dioxide, just like commercial yeast, to make the bread rise. I refresh the starter by saving a little bit of it and mixing that with more flour and water, and then I discard the majority of it. You can tell if the starter is in good shape and ready to bake bread, or if it needs to be refreshed by the aroma. If it smells overly sour, then you should refresh it. If it smells sweet and fruity and weedy, then you know it's good to go. When I first came back from Europe and tried to make a decent loaf of bread, it was really a failure because I didn't understand the process or really anything about it. My brother gave me a book, Bread Baker's Apprentice by Peter Reinhardt. And after I read that, it really gave me an understanding of the process and let me get my act together, get my system down so that I could actually bake a decent loaf of bread. In a world where everything's convenience food and fast food and prepackaged and mass-produced for convenience, it's still nice to have something done the old-fashioned way, something that's kind of handmade, even if it's as simple as a loaf of bread. I just get some pleasure out of that. There's so many variables involved. I feel like every time it's kind of a little science experiment. It's good to just tweak your recipe or tweak your technique as you go along, and I always try to come up with something that's a little bit better, a little bit different. I have been able to make some loaves of bread that I think could compete with European bread. To me, for baking the bread, is to let it be a slow process. Don't use instant rise yeast. Give the dough plenty of time to rise. Let it sit in the refrigerator overnight. I make a loaf of bread at least every week, maybe twice a week. My next challenge is to make the bread on the cover of this book, a whole wheat sourdough boule. I've made it before, and it was absolutely delicious. A nice, tangy sourdough balanced by a sweet wheaty flavor. And I've been kind of frustrated because subsequent attempts haven't really been successful. So I'm trying to experiment with that formula and get to a point where I can consistently make that loaf and make it taste good. Like, part of the amazing thing about bread, such simple ingredients, flour, water, yeast, and salt. If you do it properly, then you can get a loaf of bread that has great flavor, a great complexity of taste. There's some good artisanal bakeries around, and some stores have some decent bread, but I still like to make it at home myself. There's nothing like the aroma of a fresh sourdough bread coming out of the oven. You just can't beat that.